When you think of Czech Republic, you're probably thinking of Prague. You're definitely thinking of beer, but you're probably not thinking of the city of Ostrava, the third largest city in the country, known as the Black Heart of the Republic. My parents came from Ostrava, emigrated to the United States. I even lived here when I was younger. And today, I'm gonna be walking through my old hood with my buddy Philip here, local legend. And we're gonna be looking at what did this city look like back in the day during the communist times and before, and how has it changed since?
Ostrava sits in the northeastern corner of the Czech Republic, straddling two historic regions, Moravia and Silesia. Its outskirts a mere kilometer or two from the Polish border, Ostrava has always been at a crossroads of different cultures, a fact that can actually be said about the entirety of the Czech lands. Czechs have had to contend with larger nation-states that surround them throughout their long history. Following the long string of medieval Czech kings, including Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV, the Czechs were eventually subsumed by the Austro-Hungarian Empire until its dissolution at the end of World War I. A free and independent Czechoslovak Republic was created, but only lasted 20 years before the invasion of Nazi Germany. Relief from Nazi forces came in 1945, when Soviet tanks liberated the city.
This right here is the tank that liberated the city of Ostrava during World War II. So Nazi forces were across that bridge. This is Bridge Miloše Sikory. And this tank rolled in from the Czech Legion under the Soviet army, took 3 hits on that bridge, and hasn't moved since. All they needed to do was to elevate it and put a nice little plaque below, and it's been sitting here ever since. So this plaque is telling us that it was actually a gift from the Soviet Union to the Czech people in order to help liberate the homeland. Some of these gifts came with strings, we would later learn. I think a good place to start is actually where my mother grew up, down here, where 25 years later, my grandmother heard more Soviet tanks, but this time they weren't so friendly.
These Soviet tanks brought with them changes that eventually led to my parents risking their lives 45 years later when they fell in love. But before I tell you about that, how did we get there? The Russians lingered after World War II and imposed their style of communist governance on Czech people like my grandparents, who settled in Ostrava to work in the industrial heart of the now Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, a republic whose flags were always flown next to those of the Soviet Union, to remind everyone where their allegiance must lie. It was this world that my mother was born into, a baby, still unable to comprehend the world around her.
In 1968, my grandmother awoke at 4 a.m. to the sound of what she thought was thunder outside, but no, it was Russian tanks rolling through, once again passing over the bridge of Miloše Sikory, but this time not to liberate, but to put down any sort of dreams of freedom that they may have had. My mother at the time was in Slovakia with her grandmother, so quickly, my grandmother got on a train with her husband. She was supposed to be on a little vacation with her husband, but that was cut short. They took the train to Slovakia. There were checkpoints all along the way. They saw tanks on the hill shooting into the distance. When they got to Slovakia, got out at the train station, she remembers vividly walking to her mother's house to get her daughter, and there were dead bodies on the street. There was a clock shot up by a machine gun, and the Slovakians were risking their own lives to put bricks around the bodies in order to preserve the bodies, to identify them and not to let them be taken away. So what once started as maybe an earnest brotherhood slowly changed into an occupation, and that's continued to the present day to an imperial mindset that you see from the Russian state.
Philip and I visited the apartment that my grandmother returned to after that horrifying day. The building now has a nicer coat of paint than in the 60s, but shockingly, we found out that not everything about it had changed.
Moje mamka tady vyrostla v tady tom paneláku, tak si.
Co? Velice jak může být tvoje maminka. Počkej, vy jste z Ameriky.
Ano.
A ty z Trevor.
Trevor,
Trevor,
ano.
aha.
Já mám
Je.
takovou fotku, jak jsi měl půl roku.
Je, paní Vengořová, to je neskutečné, že vás vidím.
Chills ran down my spine when I realized that the lady we had greeted on the street turned out to be my mother's childhood neighbor, who still lives in the same apartment across the hall from where my mother grew up.
To jo, to je pravda.
Aha.
Ježiš,
Tak ona tady bydlela pod váma, nebo hned vedle?
I tu bydleli,
No.
v těch 3 oknách.
Těch
spodních.
ty brďo.
Hned dole, no.
A 2 balkony zleva ještě,
Aha, aha.
jo.
To je tady vypadá, že hned dělají.
Aha.
No oni dělají
Právě v tom
ten
starém bytě.
Oni právě v tom bytě dělají.
To je neskutečné.
I've heard so much about her. She was like a second mother to my mom.
To je náhoda, že jsem vás potkal tady. To je neskutečné.
To je
krásné,
dobře,
to je
no.
krásné.
Mrs. Venglajova remembered me from when I was a baby, from when I lived in Ostrava in the 90s as a child while my grandfather was sick.
I was here in like 99, 2000. Philip and I, we played hockey together. So there's a local team is Vitkovice, which is a team for the steel plant. And so in 2nd and 3rd grade, we went to a hockey school where you go to school and play hockey. You have practice throughout the day. That's when I lived here for a bit. And I think it's already changed a lot since I was here.
So naturally, when I returned to Ostrava this summer to see my family, I called up Philip to spend a day with him. We went on a walk through the city to check in on places I remembered from childhood, see if the city had changed since communist times, and to retrace my parents' story through the city.
Filip, jak dlouho tady bydlíš v Ostravě?
I am born and raised in Ostrava, so all my life, 32 years.
What do you think of Ostrava?
I like it here, but you can still see the communist influence, mostly in the people behaviors and traditions. People do not like to see something that is different from the eras before. They are close-minded. That's the word. They are close-minded.
Some things are changing, right? You have like the
Yeah,
festivals, and
little
you think
bit.
it's the young people who are sort of changing the mentality? or-
Definitely the young people. They are going with culture and festivals and food festivals, so it's quite good because a lot of Czech from all country are visiting Ostrava, so it's getting known better.
Yeah. There's some kids in the river here. When my mom was growing up, this river was so dirty that when she fell in once, they had to take a brush, a hard brush to her skin to get all the black oil spots out of it.
The nickname for Ostrava was Black Ostrava or Black City because of the particles from the
Right.
coal. So you stepped outside and you were basically painted black.
But now you have some people taking a dip, which maybe isn't totally advised, but it's a lot cleaner now.
It's not. Last year the river was full of dead fish.
Ah,
Like full.
so free food.
Yeah, basically free food and free herpes or something.
So we're walking across a bridge where my mother and father actually left the apartment we just saw on their first date. And the interesting thing is Ostrava is a city in 2 regions, Moravia and Silesia. So as we cross the bridge from Silesia into the center of the city, into Moravia, we're not just crossing a bridge in my family's history, but also we're going from one region to the next. We're here in front of City Hall. This was built in the 1930s during the First Republic. So throughout history, surrounded by larger countries, Czechs have had to contend with Germans, Austrians, later Russians, until after the First World War, thanks to Masaryk and the Allied forces of World War I. Czechs were able to establish their own country based on the lands of the Czech crown. And during the First Republic, they built up the country, created things like City Hall here in Ostrava in the 1930s with these beautiful doors and symbols of the city, which is this horse and a flower. It's a rose.
The rose is to represent the layers of Ostrava.
Oh,
when
layers.
it was growing from the small industrial city to the city which we have today, so that's why it's rose.
And the thorns, because Ostrava's hard.
Yeah, yeah, that's also
It'll
that,
cut
that
you
is
up.
true. That is true.
This is nice. Look at these old lamps. And this is our first monument to the victims of the communist regime, to all the bad things that some of those tanks brought with them. This was built in 1993 after the revolution. And so this is a monument to all those people who were tortured during the regime from 1948 to 1989. These are all the tortured members of the city administration during Nazi times as well. So unfortunately, it seems like after that, things also didn't change enough. But here are all those poor people under Nazi's thumb. And downstairs, we saw the communist regime doing the same things. When you see the Czech national emblem, you'll see 2 lions for Prague, for the country, and then you have Moravia and Silesia. And here you have the horse with the rose for the city of Ostrava. I love this old Art Nouveau style with the lamps. Philip's just drinking a beer in the town hall. Welcome to Czech Republic.
You can.
Here is Kino Vesmír, Vesmír movie theater. This is where my mother and father went on their first date. And my mom fell asleep in the theater on their first date, which is hilarious.
Thankfully, my mom was more interested in my dad than Excalibur. One date turned into many, which turned into a loving relationship that confronted the realities of coming of age in a totalitarian state. My dad, following his family's line of political dissidents, joined the underground music scene, playing and listening to protest music that would be disrupted by state police who were keenly aware of the names they needed to keep an eye on. His uncle had already been imprisoned for speaking out against the government and attempting to escape to the West. The future didn't look much brighter for my dad either, who had to fight like hell even to be allowed to work as a waiter. He consoled my mother when she recounted that her refusal to join the Communist Party and Russian tea ceremonies at work were starting to cause problems for her. She didn't want to end up like her uncle Yaro, barred from pursuing a career because he didn't join the party. How could they start a life in a place like this? A place where even getting things considered basics in the rest of the world was almost criminal.
Right here in the bottom was a store called Tuzek's. All the imported goods were in Tuzek's. So if you wanted things like blue jeans, Swiss chocolate, any sort of fancy items from abroad, you had to get these special currency called boni. And you could either get them through, I don't know, there were some like legal ways, I think, if you were maybe a good worker or something like that.
Yes.
Or, the better way is you could find someone in a dark alley, exchange boni for crowns, and then you can go in there and you can buy yourself some Levi's jeans. So that's how it used to be back in the communist days. Now we're gonna head out of the city center, closer to the steelworks, where all the steel was made, where the name of Ostrava was really made, Black Heart of the Republic. So we're going through what are now festival grounds, which were old steelworks. Last weekend was a concert called Beats for Love. Next weekend is a concert called Colors of Ostrava. There are a lot of big name musicians, One Republic, Ellie Goulding. Pretty interesting venue, honestly, to be able to have a concert in an old steelworks. How many people do you think go to Colors?
50, 60,000.
Wow.
Beats for Love, it was over 150,000 tickets sold.
Wow. Yeah, next time your annoying friend tells you how amazing Coachella was, you tell them that you went to a steel town in Eastern Europe and saw some music. That right there is a tower christened by Usain Bolt when the World Championship sprinting and athletics events were held here in Ostrava. He got his own tower in this rusty metropolis. When you walk through an old steel mill in Czech Republic, the only thing you can drink is Kofola. That's the Czech Coca-Cola from back in the day. My grandpa actually worked at the Kofola factory and brought home with him the syrup, mixed it up with bubbly water, made his own Kofola at home. So this was both extraction of iron ore and the synthesis of steel, metals, all sorts of things to make more tanks, more beams for houses, cans, whatever it may be. In 1872, this became the largest steelworks in all of Austria-Hungary. It was previously also part of the Rothschild Empire, where they were removing coal from the ground, mining coal. Here you can see Masaryk at the steelworks. No doubt he thought this was probably the crown jewel of production. Here you have Nazi Germany. So there was a bomb that hit the gas holder, but it remained unexploded until 1970. So they just wanted to play on the edge a little bit here.
Fuck it, leave it there.
Yeah,
It will disappear eventually.
Grab another beer. And here, communist times, you got Stalin. And that doesn't really look like Lenin. Maybe that was whoever was running the Czech Republic for the Communist Party at the time. I don't know.
This was the economic heart of Ostrava, touching all of its inhabitants in some way. Men on my dad's side of the family descended deep underground to mine coal, and on my mom's side, even my grandmother operated a crane to move steel. But outside the smoke-filled air, the world was changing, and my parents wanted to be a part of it. They left everything behind and made a daring escape out of the Eastern Bloc to West Germany, and eventually the United States. In their absence, they would be convicted of crimes against the state back in Ostrava by the communist government. but a couple years later, the people rose up and put an end to one-party communist rule in what was later called the Velvet Revolution. My parents, the Czech people, and Ostrava found themselves in a new world, wondering whether there was a place in it for them. The city's people and its steelworks stepped into a globalized world, knowing there would be no going back.
Poslední odpich, the last time that they started up these giant blast furnaces in 1998, when I was probably just moved here for the first time. This was all winding down, concluding a history of pig iron production that lasted 162 years.
In a lot of ways, shutting down the steel plant was the easy part. It's what you do after that that's truly difficult. The same could be said for the Czech people when they got rid of the communist government, and also for my parents once they escaped to a new country. But what happened next? Did they seize their opportunity? Did their relationship to their past life change? For us, the realities of that past life came knocking when my grandfather fell ill in the late 90s. My parents moved our family back to Ostrava for 2 years when I was starting second grade. For Mom and Dad, it was a hesitant return, but for me, it was my first time meeting my family's past in person.
Philip and I went to school here in the Vítkovice district right next to all the factories, because the hockey rink for the steel team Vítkovice is right across the way. So this was our walk to school. Get off the tram, put on your school slippers. That's something unique in Czech. You have slippers for school, you don't just wear your shoes in.
White one, that's the specific type. Czech slippers, jarmilky.
Philip just said that once when they were going from school, after I had already moved back to the US, there was a dude on that giant chimney, police everywhere here, who was thinking of jumping off. And I don't know, we don't know if he ever jumped.
We don't know because we step on the tram finally after 1 hour of hoping that he will jump.
Oh my God.
And we will get some action. None of this happened, so it's like, oh, fuck it. Let's go home.
Hopefully it's safe and sound.
Yeah.
The school was called Rostislavova because it was on Rostislavova Street. It's gonna be right here to the left. Ex-President Václav Klaus, his son, now made this into a private school called Porg. It's totally different. It was like overgrown. It was like an old asphalt field here that we played on. I got punched in the nose in second grade, started crying. I remember that. This is where our classes were, and there was a gym.
Yeah.
We got really lucky that day. A guy working at the new school kindly offered to show us inside to our old classroom in the old gym.
Tady byla třetí třída.
Jo.
A tady čtvrtá. Ty vole. No. My jsme měli jenom s křídou.
No,
Staré.
to už by dneska
To jsou zážitky.
Vy jste měli šatny ještě ve sklepě, ne?
Ano, přesně.
Nevím, jak se tam chodili, to bylo nízké, ne?
Jo, no, to my jsme byli malí.
Tak my jsme byli špunti ještě.
Tak tady se v podstatě nic moc nezměnilo.
Aha.
Nebylo co, aby se změnilo.
Tady jak nás chytl kofránek za vlasy.
Ten mi vytáhal tolik kotlet.
No, to
Byli takový neposlední.
a my jsme všichni, to byla hokejová třída.
Skoro
takže
30 kluků ve
to byla
třídě.
banda.
To s náma měli
byla
zabavu,
sebranka,
no.
že?
Jo. Dýmovnice do šuplíku a takové
Celý
jsme
z
dělali.
oken, no,
Jo,
to byla
celý z oken.
džungle.
Dá se z toho vyrost.
Jo, dá, teď jsme jako solidní kluci.
Ty brďo.
Seeing this place was like stepping into a dream. It looked a little different, but those feelings of my childhood in this place came rushing back.
Tak děkujem, to byl zážitek.
Tak jo, tak děkujem.
Jo.
Mějte se, nashledanou.
Well, that was awesome. Just went right into the classroom where we used to cause a ruckus. Played some gym games. Got some slaps to the face when we were stupid. Philip, the new teacher now, can probably tell you how times have changed since we went to school as well.
Yeah.
Not just how the city's changed, but the people have changed, the mentality has changed. Not as much corporal punishment or
No slapping or touching.
no slapping, touching, which is probably for the best. Although one could argue that we deserved it here and there.
We deserved it.
We sure
Most of
did.
the times.
Most of the time.
During the time my family moved back to Ostrava, things weren't easy for the city. Like in many American Rust Belt cities, deindustrialization meant a lot of lost jobs, hopelessness, and questions about the city's identity. Structures that were symbols of the city's prowess turned into haunting reminders of what was lost. I too lost an institution from my youth, a place where my own identity as an athlete was forged. Philip and I went to visit the place of our former holy site.
So you can see literally that building is crumbling in the background. And right here where these trucks were was Ledňáček, which was basically just means like ice area. And that's where we had our practices. It was a really, really old ice hockey rink where when it was like fall or spring, you'd have all this fog on the ice. The cooling system wasn't, perfect. So you'd have all this moisture. I used to return a lot of times in the summers train in this stadium. I met some professional hockey players, Marek Malik, Thomas Fleischman, Peter Kalis. It was a really cool place to train. And now instead of in the old Ledňáček, kids will never understand. They got this brand new arena, which is for the best, but man, did that place have character. Holy cow.
When a country, city, or people end an era, the question becomes, what do we keep in our past and what do we bring with us into the future? Do we tear down Ledňáček or do we reinvent the space? Should a son learn his parents' native tongue or is it better for him to just be American now? While I ran stadium steps in the arena, the Czech Republic was building itself up too, leaving behind its centrally planned economy, reconnecting with the Western world, and going back to its democratic roots from the First Republic. My family went back to its roots too during our time in Ostrava, living in the neighborhood my dad grew up in. My dad showed me places that brought back great memories, but also things that we wanted to leave in our past. Things that my dad needed to run away from his whole childhood.
We are in the Zábřeh district of Ostrava. It's a little bit on the edge of the city next to a small forested park. I used to live here. In Czech, we have these little trafikas. It's usually an old grumpy lady selling chewing gum, Coca-Cola, and before the automatic payment systems on the trams, you get the little tram ticket, you'd stamp it in the old reader. There is an old theater here. My dad, when he was a kid, in the 70s, went to, and it's still here. Probably a different monitor, maybe some different seats, but same old idea. Take a girl on a date, walk home, hope for the best.
No air condition, nothing.
Nah, nothing.
There you go.
I think they had wooden seats when we were there
Wooden
last.
seats, yeah.
Yeah.
And not even a Coca-Cola.
Just go full.
Just Coca.
The way God intended. I used to live in that tower. I think it was on the 10th floor, and we used to sled down this little hill here. It now looks like the most hilariously tiny hill ever, but to us, it was a good hill. Yeah, we used to throw uncooked spaghetti, and it would stick into the ground like an arrow. My dad grew up in this area as well, right behind here. We'll go check that out as well. My great-grandmother, who I had the pleasure of getting to know, also lived here. My dad's mother's side of the family lived here. A lot of them drank in this bar down here called Avion, and it doesn't look like it's changed that much. This place is for good old boys, that's for sure. Other family members learned to drink a little too much. So yeah, this is a infamous spot for me.
Tam nahrávat tu chatru. Tam je poslovna teďka, to je ale v najmu, víš, ale jakože...
A chodíš ještě tady do hospody, dole? Na ten avion, nebo ne?
Jsem tam jenom, ale stojí to za piču.
Jo.
Víš, to bylo lepší.
Probably my first memories in Czech were here on this. It used to be like a dirt field, actually. I was playing with toy soldiers, and my great-grandmother lived right over there in this building, a place where my dad spent a lot of his time growing up, as well with his sister. And in the basement of this building was a gym that my uncle built, who was a bodybuilder, and who later had an amazing escape story to the US. And he took me once down to the gym. We pumped some weights when I was like 17. It was full of naked women on the walls, old school gym. But yeah, I remember right here, this balcony. That's where my great-grandmother used to live. And this is where my dad really grew up, which is amazing. And look how beautiful the flowers are here. This looks different, it looks nicer. People are taking care of their lot. The farther you get from the Avion, the nicer life gets.
What becomes increasingly clear as you grow up is that these experiences aren't just about saying your farewells to the previous generation, but about introducing the next generation to the past in a way that doesn't hide the darkness and allows us to create our own connections.
I used to run in this forest with my friend and my friend's dad, who had a little device on his bike that told him how far we were. So the dad would be biking, him and I would be running through the woods until we hit a certain number, and we started running back. My dad would go into this forest to escape life at home, get into nature a little bit. It still works today. Now you got people on mountain bikes. Now that there's a little bit more money in the country, people can afford nice bikes, nice roller blades. You can see that the basic desires are there, but now you can act on them in more sophisticated ways.
When I come back to Ostrava, I don't visit out of a sense of duty. I'm excited to revisit my old life and check in on its progress. I return to introduce my new family and to show them what the city was and can one day become. And I think Ostrava sees it the same way. It's a city conscious of its past, but ready to define its 21st century. In that way, it's really a microcosm of the whole country. Czechs remember the past, but know better than to try to return to it. And that's what I want to understand on this channel, to learn from the past by experiencing the present, and maybe have some ideas for the future.
Come see Ostrava, come to the other side of the country, to the east. The Moravian people, maybe we talk too fast, maybe we drink a little too much, but it's called the Black Heart of the Republic for a reason. There's a heart here. There's the people who are unabashedly themselves and are moving forward. Thanks for joining us.